Just sold my car with CarGurus.
Determine your eligibility.
Placed on a server where parts still learning new.
It is another election night. Big night for all of us here, especially in New York.
Enjoy. You get to hang out with Steve Kornacki in person, and I am jealous.
It's a dream. Have a great night, Chris. and thank you all at home for joining us this hour. Tonight, polls have just now closed in New York, home to several consequential primaries and 2 special elections that may tell us a lot about the role abortion will play in the midterms. Steve Kornacki joins us at the big board. And Florida political guru Mark Caputo is here as Florida Democrats choose their pick to take on Governor Ron DeSantis. Plus, breaking news tonight about the top secret documents Trump had at Mar-a-Lago, information being called, quote, among the most sensitive secrets the U.S. holds. Donald Trump reportedly wouldn't show some of the material even to his top aides. One of the Washington Post reporters who broke that story, Carol Lenning, joins us live. And a jury finds 2 men guilty of conspiring to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer as the IRS ramps up security because of threats from the far right. But we start tonight with what you might call a quintessential New York moment.
You send another goon to my daughter's house and I'll take you out, buddy.
You're going to take me out?
Yeah.
How are you going to do that?
Watch.
Wait, hey.
Simpler times. That was then Republican candidate for New York Governor Carl Palladino threatening to take out a reporter way back in 2010. If you followed New York politics over the past decade or so, you may remember Carl Palladino. He became nationally famous during that race thanks to a host of scandals, most notably for sending racist, sexist, and bestiality-laden emails that are too graphic for me to even try and describe on television. Palladino went on to get crushed in that governor's race. He lost by about 30 points. Now, tonight, both New York and Florida are holding primary elections ahead of this year's midterms. And one candidate looking to make a comeback in those primaries is none other than Carl Palladino. This time, Palladino is running for a congressional seat in Western New York. And because it is a Republican primary in the year of our Lord 2022, Carl Palladino has a real shot at winning, even as he continues to make the kind of outlandish statements that lost him that governor's race a decade ago. In a recently resurfaced radio interview, Palladino is heard praising Adolf Hitler. Yes, that Adolf Hitler, saying he's the kind of leader we need today. And just last week, Palladino called for Attorney General Merrick Garland to be executed following the FBI's search of Donald Trump's Florida home. But Carl Palladino is not the only scandal-plagued Republican on the ballot tonight. NBC News projects that Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz has fended off his primary challenger tonight, despite the fact that Gaetz is currently being investigated by the FBI for potential sex crimes, including the alleged human trafficking of a minor. In the final days of that campaign, Congressman Gaetz' opponent suggested that he was the FBI informant who prompted the Mar-a-Lago search, which, to be clear, in Florida's Republican primary, is considered a very bad thing. But honestly, truly, some of the most important races to watch tonight are on the Democratic side. There is the race to try and replace Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, where NBC News projects that former Florida Governor Charlie Crist has beaten Florida Agriculture Commissioner Nikki Fried to be the Democratic nominee for governor. In the closing days of the primary, the 2 candidates have been blasting each other over their respective ties to Florida Republicans and the Florida Republican Party. Crist, Florida's former Republican governor, who became an independent in 2010 and then a Democrat in 2012, criticized Fried for donating to Florida's current Republican attorney general and working with Congressman Matt Gaetz. And then there is also the Democratic primary race for Florida Senate, where NBC News projects that Congresswoman Val Demings has cinched the nomination to take on Senator Marco Rubio in the fall. And in the race to fill Demings' seat in the House, NBC News projects that gun safety activist Maxwell Frost has prevailed over a crowded field to win the Democratic primary. At age 25, Maxwell Frost would be the youngest member of Congress should he succeed this November. He would also become the first member of Generation Z to enter Congress. Whew. And then, of course, there's even more. In New York. Earlier this year, a court battle over redistricting essentially threw New York's congressional map into a state of pure chaos. Now, in New York's 12th congressional district, House Judiciary Committee Chair Jerry Nadler has been forced into a primary against House Oversight Committee Chairwoman Carolyn Maloney. Two sitting chairs of two very important committees forced to face off against each other because of redistricting. That kind of dynamic is playing out all across New York State. In New York's 17th district, Democratic Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney and Mondaire Jones, both of them congressmen, were almost forced to run against each other as well. Congressman Jones ended up agreeing to run for Congress in a different district, one that didn't have an incumbent, which was supposed to ease the pressure on those Democratic members of Congress. But now, both of those incumbents are locked in tough primaries against different opponents. Congressman Maloney is facing a progressive firebrand state senator. Her name is Alessandra Biaggi, she has the support of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And Congressman Mondaire Jones is locked in a wide-open primary against a bunch of challengers, including a popular state assemblywoman, a popular city councilwoman, and Dan Goldman, the former House counsel for Donald Trump's first impeachment. On top of all of that, there is also a special general election for a swing district in New York. Former New York candidate for governor Mark Molinaro is facing off against Democrat Pat Ryan in a race that many are expecting to be an early test of Democrats' messaging around abortion and abortion's impact on Republican candidates in swing districts heading into November. As proof of that, Democrat Pat Ryan has peppered the district with pink yard signs like this one that read, "Choice is on the ballot." Like I said, there is a ton to get to tonight, and there is no better co-pilot, maybe even pilot, than the great Steve Kornacki, who is at the big board where he's getting the first results from New York. Steve Kornacki, my friend.
Alex, yes, we're getting them quickly here. In that special election, we don't have any from yet, but we actually have a ton right now in the 12th district. And you're just talking about this is where Jerry Nadler and Carolyn Maloney, two long-serving Democrats, each in the House for 30 years, both elected in 1992, pitted against each other. And you can see Nadler with a lot of votes that just got reported out, a 2-to-1 advantage here over Carolyn Maloney. Again, we're looking at, nearly 40,000 votes now have just been reported out in this district. Again, what this basically is, the dynamic at work here for folks who know New York City, for folks who know Manhattan. Jerry Nadler has represented the Upper West Side of Manhattan for the last 30 years. Carolyn Maloney has represented the Upper East Side of Manhattan for the last 30 years. The two sides were merged in this district. There's also a third candidate who had run against Maloney a couple years ago. There'd been some late polling in this race that suggested Nadler might actually be pulling ahead, and certainly that seems to be what we're seeing in the early returns. And I say early, this is a substantial amount of vote that is in here in the 12th district, and Jerry Nadler with a 2-to-1 advantage here over Carolyn Maloney. We are also getting a substantial number of votes. You can see in the 10th district some complicated dynamics here in the 10th district Democratic primary. Again, we are talking about Manhattan, and this goes into a little bit of Brooklyn as well. Daniel Goldman, though, you remember him, the lawyer, the former federal prosecutor who was a part of the Democratic impeachment proceedings, counsel for the Democrats in the impeachment proceedings of Donald Trump, comes from some money and spent a lot of that money here, and he has jumped out to an advantage here of just over 1,000 votes. Yuleen New running in second right here. Interestingly, Mondaire Jones, he's listed as the incumbent. Now, Mondaire Jones was actually elected to a district, to represent a district up in the Hudson Valley because of all the redistricting chaos in New York. He ended up coming and moving to and running in this district. There are no constituents in this district, this 10th district, though, who Jones currently represents in Congress. So he's listed as the incumbent, but this is an entirely new district to him. He's an entirely new congressman for the constituents in this district, and he is running in third here. You can see, you look at a city councilwoman here, Carlina Rivera. Liz Holtzman was a member of Congress back in the 70s till 1980. She's been seeking a comeback. But Dan Goldman out to the early lead here. And you can see Jerry Nadler with a big advantage over Carolyn Maloney in this race. And I'm just checking in to let's check in here to see if we have any numbers. We don't in the 17th. And I'm just going to look to see. We do have our first numbers in the special election here. So let me get to that. And that's going to take me 1 second to call up on the screen But let's get to the special election here. Yay. And
Ulster County.
Again, for the special election. And this should call up. Here we go. Okay. We are getting our very first reports here. And let's put the counties up so we can get a sense where this is coming from here. But the Republican here, again, we're talking, okay, now we got a ton of votes here. And I'm guessing we just got, is it Ulster County? Okay. What just happened is the Democrat here, Ulster County, he is the Ulster County executive. And so what was just reported out here in Ulster County is the single largest component of this district. It's about 1/4 of the district in terms of population. 1/4 of the district is in Ulster County. Ulster County is the most Democratic county in this district, and Pat Ryan is the Ulster County executive. This is his home base. Now, the numbers that you just saw reported out here in Ulster County, this is the early and absentee vote. This is important because we always talk about how there's this big split now when we look at Democrat versus Republican races. The early absentee vote, vote by mail, is the strongest vote for Democrats that you see. So that's what was just reported out here in Ulster County. So I want to give you a sense here. Ulster County in the 2020 presidential election went for Joe Biden with 60% of the vote. Overall, Biden won this district by 2. So if you're Ryan, you really want to be running above Biden's number. You know, anything above, he wants to get a few points above 60%. That's where he wants to land at the end of the night. Now, he just got a big boost from the early and absentee votes. That is expected. As I say, Democrats do best with the early and absentee. But one thing I can tell you, by comparison, this same batch of votes in 2020, Joe Biden got 77% of the early absentee vote in Ulster County in 2020. Ryan is getting basically 80% of the early absentee vote in Ulster County. So what's going to happen now in Ulster County is they're going to start counting up the same-day vote. And the same-day vote is always vastly more Republican than the early and absentee. So the Molinaro number is going to come up. The Ryan number is going to come down. And the key here in a place like Ulster County is Ryan wants to land probably above where Biden landed in 2020 because there are some other parts of this district where Molinaro is expected to outperform what Donald Trump did. So in this initial big batch of votes from the biggest county in the district, Ryan is getting, I'd say, the number he wants to get. He wants to be a little bit better than Biden. He is a little bit better than Biden in the early absentee component. Let's see what happens as the same-day vote comes in from the rest of the district. And let's also just check back to see if we got more numbers from elsewhere in the district. That's mainly what we're getting right now. Again, I'm just trying to see they're not lighting up here, so I'll just see where the other county is. Okay, it's Sullivan County. And again, so I'll give you an example. This is sort of how it works here. Molinaro running at the Trump number already in Sullivan County. And again, I think you're looking at likely early absentee here. So when you say Molinaro is expected to outperform Trump in some other parts of the district, this could be an example of that. So again, those are the two counties, Ulster and Sullivan, that we have numbers from. We don't have. I'm just checking in on Dutchess County. Dutchess County is the second biggest county in this district, and it's where Mark Molinaro is the county executive. And this one's going to be key because Joe Biden carried Dutchess County, the Dutchess County component of this district. Joe Biden carried it in 2020. And this is where Molinaro, because he's the county executive, he's won countywide elections here before, he is definitely expected to improve on Donald Trump's number in Dutchess County. It just makes it that much more important for Ryan in a place like Ulster and some other parts of this district to outperform what Joe Biden did. So again, no numbers yet from Dutchess. Real key question here is how much Molinaro can outperform Trump. But just checking back in, again, basically, you got a big chunk, that early absentee from Ulster County, went through the significance of that. But the numbers should be coming in pretty quickly here from elsewhere in the district.
I have spent time in the 19th at town halls when Antonio Delgado was representing that county, and I can tell you it is not overstatement to say it is a bellwether for swing districts across this country. It is truly, it's an Obama, Trump, Biden county, and for that reason alone, it deserves our attention as we look to the midterm. Steve Kornacki, thank you as always. We will be back to you when you have more news. Now I want to turn to NBC News national political reporter Mark Caputo, who is in Florida. Mark, let's just first talk about the headline headline news, which is that Democrats have picked their nominee to head up against Ron DeSantis in the fall. What do we make of Charlie Crist's chances, given the fact that he's a party hopper, someone who is well known to Floridians? What do you make of the odds here?
Well, I'll tell you what Democrats make of the odds. Both consultants, grassroots activists, lawmakers, and former lawmakers, all Democrats, some Crist supporters, some Fried supporters. I spoke to more than 20 for the article we just moved. None of them give Charlie Crist much of a chance. In fact, a Crist advisor said to me that this is basically the Powerball election. Like, hey, we still got a chance. The chances of winning the average Powerball is 1 in 292.4 million.
Can't win
so
if you don't play, Mark. Can't win if you don't play.
This is true.
I'm just saying.
You miss all of the shots you don't take, right? So Charlie Crist is taking a shot. Now, this is his second go-round for governor as a Democrat. It's the second time he's defeated a woman in the primary. In this case, it was Nikki Fried, who is the only statewide elected Democrat. Now, if things go as Democrats fear, again, they go as Democrats fear, and if Charlie Crist loses to DeSantis, as the polling indicates, and the other cabinet members, who are all Democrats, who are little known and underfunded, who are running against incumbent Republicans, if they lose, then no statewide elected Democrat will hold a seat in Florida for the first time since Reconstruction. Gives you a good idea of how terrible the Democratic Party's fortunes are here. In addition to DeSantis leading in the polls, he's sitting on at least $140 million cash on hand in the bank as a war chest. We've never seen that before here or in any state for anyone running for governor. In addition to that, national Democrats, understandably so, aren't so keen about playing in Florida. They're not really interested. And President Biden's poll numbers aren't doing much favor for Democrats down ballot. That'll include Charlie Crist. Now, there is a potential bright spot for Democrats here. It's Val Demings. She won a kind of against token primary opposition. She's going to take on Senator Marco Rubio in the general election. So you're going to see Democrats kind of place a lot of their hopes and their eggs in that basket.
I do. It's probably worth mentioning the popularity of Governor DeSantis, who we've talked a lot about, especially last week. His policies seem to be resonating with conservatives in the states. He has a new ad out today where he's pretending to be, he's doing some cosplay as Maverick in Top Gun, riding a fighter jet and briefing Floridians on the rules of engagement. It reminds, I think, a lot of us who are old enough to remember of Michael Dukakis and his 19 between now and November. Or do you think that the days of Florida even being a swing state are completely over? This is the sort of, I guess, the petri dish for national Republican policy and for a new kind of conservatism, it sounds like.
Right. As for how DeSantis, I can't really say how the ultimate race is going to shake out, obviously, but I can just say that there's a reason Democrats are really worried. It should be pointed out that, yes, DeSantis was in the Navy. He was a JAG officer. He was a lawyer. He was not a fighter pilot. Nevertheless, the difference between him and Michael Dukakis is DeSantis has built quite a brand for himself in the party in taking on the press, attacking the quote-unquote corporate media, even though he certainly does lots of hits on Fox News, where he built kind of his brand and got President Trump's attention, which in turn led to an endorsement and helped him win his primary in 2018 and ultimately the governor's mansion. So the fact is that DeSantis has captured not only the hearts of Republicans in Florida, but increasingly nationwide. In polls of a potential 2024 Republican primary, Trump is still on top. In fact, he started a kind of surge over DeSantis, in part because after the Mar-a-Lago search warrant that was executed by the FBI, there's been a rallying around of former President Trump. I don't know how long that's going to last, but for the time being, President Trump is telling folks that he still feels pretty good about that, despite the mounting legal challenges that are starting to kind of close in all around him.
Well, we will have much more on those mounting legal challenges later in the hour. Mark Caputo, NBC News national political reporter, thanks, as always, for your time tonight. We have some breaking news from the primaries this evening and from the elections this evening happening in New York and Florida especially. NBC News is projecting that Jerry Nadler defeats Carolyn Maloney in New York's 12th congressional district. That is a new district drawn in part by the new redistricting that happened as a result of the latest census. And then there was a lawsuit. And now two, I would say, titans of the Democratic Party in Congress head-to-head matchup tonight, and it looks like Jerry Nadler is the victor in that by a fairly large margin. We will have more on the election results from New York, but up next, breaking news from the Washington Post about Donald Trump and the top-secret documents he had at Mar-a-Lago. New reports about how sensitive the material at Mar-a-Lago really was. Carol Lenning, one of the reporters who broke that story, joins us next. We'll be right back. Shooting yourself in the foot, cutting off your nose to spite your face, pressing the button on self-destruct. You can call it whatever you'd like. On Monday, 2 weeks after the FBI executed a search warrant on the former president's Palm Beach estate, Donald Trump filed a lawsuit asking for the FBI's review of documents taken from Mar-a-Lago, for that review to be put on hold until a third party, what's called a special master, is appointed to review the seized materials. In that lawsuit, Trump argued that he has cooperated perfectly with federal investigators and the National Archives throughout this whole mess that began in January of 2021. His lawsuit states, quote, all facts show that there was complete cooperation between President Trump, his team, and the appropriate agencies. It even includes a quote from Donald Trump himself. Why raid my home with a platoon of federal agents when I have voluntarily cooperated with your every request? You sure about that? Last night, we learned from the New York Times that the National Archives recovered more than 150 classified documents from Trump's Florida home in January, which were squirreled away in 15 boxes of documents. We also learned that Trump personally went through those documents before he turned them over. In a bid to somehow help the former president, Trump right-wing media ally John Solomon late last night published a letter from the National Archives to one of Trump's lawyers. It's dated May 10th. Now, Solomon hyped this letter as evidence that somehow Biden had sicked the FBI on Trump. But as it turns out, Solomon was really sort of shooting himself, or rather Donald Trump, in the foot. For starters, this May letter from the National Archives confirms the New York Times reporting that over 100 documents retrieved by the government in January from Mar-a-Lago, that they were marked classified. The National Archivist details that specifically it was over 700 pages of classified information just hanging out at Mar-a-Lago. Included in some of these were documents with some of the very highest levels of classification, including special access program materials, which even if you have top security clearance, you still need additional clearance to see that kind of document. The letter, again, the letter somehow meant to exonerate Trump and implicate Biden. It also confirms that Trump and his crew had been dragging their feet for weeks, asserting bogus claims of executive privilege in an attempt to delay the seized documents from being handed over to the Justice Department. So while the archives retrieved the boxes of documents in January, the FBI and the DOJ didn't get access to the contents of those boxes until the month of May. Donald Trump clearly has a different definition of cooperation than most of us do. But that is not all. In June, when the Justice Department officials went to Mar-a-Lago to ask Donald Trump, hey, are there any more classified documents lying around? Trump's former CrossFit lawyer reportedly signed a statement saying that Trump had handed over all those documents. She signed a statement affirming, yes, that is it. Nothing else to see here, folks. But even after that June visit, even after Trump's attorney swore there were no more classified documents in Mar-a-Lago, double pinky swear, the Justice Department wasn't convinced. So on August 8th, the FBI executed a search warrant where they found, you guessed it, more documents at Mar-a-Lago marked top secret. The New York Times reported late last night that, in fact, federal agents in total have now retrieved over 300 classified documents, which is hundreds and hundreds of pages of classified material from Mar-a-Lago. That record of obfuscation and foot dragging and false statements is apparently Donald Trump's definition of complete cooperation. And we have breaking news tonight about that supposed cooperation. The Washington Post reports what happened when archives first received the documents in January. Quote, When archives employees began opening up and sifting through the material, they noticed an immediate problem. The boxes arrived without any kind of logs or inventories to describe their content, according to a person familiar with the recovery. Instead, they contained a hodgepodge of documents, including some that didn't even come from Trump's time in the White House. But some of the White House records had obvious markings indicating they were classified. Now, NBC News has not yet confirmed this reporting. The Washington Post report continues to chronicle how the FBI conducted its investigation and just precisely how involved Donald Trump was personally with overseeing the documents. Quote, as the fight with the archives came to an uneasy conclusion, the FBI proceeded with interviews with others in Trump's orbit, including valets and former White House staffers. Agents were told that Trump was a pack rat who had been personally overseeing his collection of White House records since even before leaving Washington and had been reluctant to return anything. The FBI became increasingly convinced that the former president continued to hold classified documents in Florida. It could not be determined who was involved with packing the boxes at Mar-a-Lago or why some White House documents were not sent to the archives, though people familiar with the episode said Trump oversaw the process himself and did so with great secrecy, declining to show some items even to his top aides. Some material recovered in the search is considered extraordinarily sensitive because it could reveal carefully guarded secrets about U.S. intelligence gathering methods. One of them said the information is among the most sensitive secrets we hold. Around that time, Trump attorneys Evan Corcoran and Christina Bobb together provided the Justice Department with a written assurance about Trump having returned classified materials. A person familiar with the matter said the person did not provide the specific wording of the letter, which was signed by Bobb. A person familiar with the matter said the document is of interest to the FBI, which is investigating the veracity of its claims. Joining us now is Washington Post national reporter Carol Leonnig, who is bylined on the story tonight. Carol, thank you so much for being here. It is breaking, and it is explosive. I think the first thing that at least grabbed me in reading this article is just how deeply the former president appears to have been in selecting these documents. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, what's clear in both the interviews we've done with sources and also as revealed in a lot of new records and letters that are coming out is that the president was very involved, the former president was very involved in, at the last minute, hastily and chaotically packing up his documents that he thought were quote unquote his, and arranging for them to be taken to Mar-a-Lago, his private club and part-time residence. And that also importantly, Alex, despite the former president's claim that all he's done has been cooperative, what we found is that week after week, he was the person resisting providing records. He was the person, along with his lawyers, asking for delay in allowing the FBI, for example, to look over the classified records that they found, to their horror, to their shock, in a group of 15 boxes of records that they retrieved from Mar-a-Lago. And so the former president is very, very much at the center of this drama. And now his own advisors, legal and otherwise, are growing increasingly concerned and have been since June that this is a criminal investigation in which the former president is in legal jeopardy, ultimately of his own making. That if perhaps he had turned over the records willingly and forthrightly right away in January or in December or in the fall of 2021, all of these times that it was asked for, that it might not have morphed into a criminal investigation looking at the willful retention of some of the highest and most sensitive secrets our government holds.
Yeah, I think we should focus on that a little bit, because this isn't like a former president sitting at his kitchen table leafing through memorabilia that he mistakenly brought home, right? I mean, you specifically say in the story that he was going through these documents with, quote, great secrecy, declining to show some items even to top aides. And what are we talking about, Carol? I mean, some of the most sensitive secrets we hold. Can you talk more about that and just the amount of, I mean, not only the recognition of that among the people reporting on this story, but within Trump's circle, it sounds like nobody really wanted to touch this case with a 10-foot pole.
Oh, such a good point. And I promise we will circle back to that, Alex, about the 10-foot pole that a lot of people were avoiding taking hold of. So your first question about the sensitivity of this material. As described in the inventory, some of this material is top secret, secure, compartmented information. That means that people have to, as you described earlier so well, people who are in government have to have an absolute reason to know and access this information as part of their job. It has to be somebody who's incredibly trustworthy and has this very high security clearance. And usually secure compartmented information involves intelligence gathering methods. The records that were seized on August 8th, just as the FBI and the Department of Justice feared, were some of those holiest of holy kinds of records that, if shared indiscriminately or handled carelessly in a private restaurant, club, if ever disclosed, would cause immediate grave danger to national security, because it would reveal how the U.S. gathers the intelligence that it has. That includes, for example, which allies provide us special intelligence that they don't share with others. That includes, for example, covert programs that we have that gather intelligence. And if those details were revealed to a foreign adversary, our chances of protecting national security would be greatly diminished. Grave threats. Now, you asked that good question about people who during this period who worked for Donald Trump or were in the Trump orbit, trying to avoid being involved in this case. Starting in the fall of 2021, Donald Trump was resisting turning over records he believed were quote unquote mine, meaning his. And the archives knew that he had a lot of records, that things were missing, that they needed them. Eventually, Donald Trump's team turned over 15 boxes of records. The shocker for people who had previously worked in President Trump's White House counsel's office was that those records included highly classified materials. When they were notified, in particular, Deputy White House Counsel Patrick Philbin, when he was notified in April that the National Archives found that there was classified information in these documents, he was stunned. And he was being asked at that time to help Team Trump review the records, to go up to the National Archives and review what had been turned over and figure out what are in these boxes, which you would think they would have looked before. But Patrick Philbin and others backed away from this request by Team Trump. And pretty soon the FBI was knocking on their doors, asking the Deputy White House counsels, we need to interview you. You're now a subject witness. You may be a witness for us about what's going on in this withholding of what appear to be incredibly sensitive documents.
At this point, can you really blame any lawyer who doesn't want to work for Donald Trump? Carol Lenning, Washington Post national reporter, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and with that breaking news to boot. Up next, a federal judge that Donald Trump appointed calls into question the lawsuit he filed against the DOJ. Former prosecutor Rebecca Roiphe joins us next. We'll be right back. We are continuing to follow this new reporting in the Washington Post tonight, chronicling former President Trump's reluctance to hand over classified documents to the proper authorities. Also tonight, in the latest legal setback for the former president, the federal judge overseeing Trump's lawsuit, a judge who was, by the way, appointed by Donald Trump, is asking Trump to clarify the exact purpose of the lawsuit that he filed yesterday, the one asking for a special master to review the documents seized by the FBI in August. Joining us now is a former prosecutor in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and a current professor at New York University Law School, Rebecca Roiphe. Rebecca, thanks for joining me. We have a lot to talk about here. So first, let me just get your reaction to the Washington Post reporting about how centrally Trump was involved in the selection of these documents, that it was shrouded in secrecy, that the documents themselves were highly sensitive. What do you see as potential legal implications of all of that?
Well, in order to prove any kind of crime, especially, there's been a lot of discussion about the Espionage Act since we saw the search warrant. You need to show two things, that the act actually happened and that the person possessed the state of mind that's required in order to have criminal liability. And so this is relevant for both of those things. He was in possession of these documents that were highly classified and highly sensitive. We should really use the term sensitive because the criminal statutes don't refer to classification level. They just refer to something that implicates the national security. And so he had those documents. The next question is, did he willfully retain them? And that's this reporting is so critical for that because what it essentially says is that he was personally involved in this. He can't blame somebody else. It was him. And also that there were all of these repeated requests to cooperate. And so that makes it look like it wasn't any accident. He was really doing this on purpose.
The fact that a Trump ally released one critical piece of paper in a paper trail that shows Donald Trump was not willing and was not cooperative really does. I mean, it fits under the dictionary definition of shooting oneself in one's foot. I mean, did you think that there was any credence to implicating Biden somehow in any of this?
Here's the thing, is that when Trump's legal avenues start to close, when there start to be fewer and fewer legal claims he can make, he retreats to this one thing that has worked for him repeatedly, which is the witch hunt. This is the Democrats. They're out to get me. This is a politically motivated thing. And it has worked for him politically, not legally, but politically. And so in that regard, I suppose there are little crumbs in here that you might, if you twist around, make it look like, oh, Biden, who keeps saying that he's leaving this all to his Department of Justice, was involved. But if you look at it a little bit more closely, that disappears because he was only involved in a sort of nominal way because he is the president. I mean, these documents belong to the presidency.
Right.
So how can you approve their transfer to the Department of Justice without him signing off on it? But he specifically said, look, I'm deferring to the Department of Justice in terms of the legal determination of whether or not these are privileged. All I'm doing is saying, like, OK, if this is a determination that's been made, I give my OK. And so he's not meddling in some kind of improper way in the investigation or in this, if it turns into an ultimate prosecution. That's not what he's doing. But through smoke and mirrors, I suppose, they were trying to make it look that way.
Well, I mean, there's more to get to in future hours ahead, Rebecca, including the appointment of a special master and whether we think that's going to happen, even though it's a Trump-appointed judge who's looking at that. Rebecca Roiphe, former prosecutor in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, thank you for your time. I appreciate it and your wisdom. Up next, two men were convicted today for their role in one of the highest-profile domestic terrorism cases we have seen in this country in decades. Stay with us. First, there was the Unlock Michigan protest. More than 1,000 cars draped in Trump flags surrounded the Michigan state capitol in April of 2020, demanding not just an end to the state's COVID restrictions, but also to get rid of Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. They called her a tyrant for imposing those restrictions, and they compared her to Hitler. President Trump himself supported their cause 2 days after that protest, tweeting, "Liberate Michigan." Conservatives and conservative media took up the cause, repeatedly calling Whitmer an authoritarian and a tyrant.
Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, not impressive, has imposed what might be the most authoritarian restrictions on daily life in the history of this country. Sort of like an out-of-control tyrant.
I'm saying hello from the police state of Michigan, where I live under the martial law of Gretchen Whitmer.
And then 2 weeks later, things just escalated. Hundreds of protesters, many of them heavily armed, rushed the Michigan state capitol. They chanted, "Let us in," and demanded to be let onto the House floor. They were trying to put pressure on Michigan state lawmakers who were voting to let Governor Whitmer's emergency declaration expire. This is a photo that a Michigan state senator took of armed protesters yelling down at them during that vote from the balcony. Again, these protests were both against COVID restrictions and against Governor Whitmer herself. President Trump responded to this round of armed protests by calling the protesters, quote, very good people. Then, a few months after that, the FBI foiled an alleged plot by two conservative Michigan militia groups to kidnap and possibly kill Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Starting in June, the groups had begun tactical training, firearms training, and combat drills. They learned how to use improvised explosive devices. They conducted surveillance on Governor Whitmer's residences, and ultimately, they meticulously planned to kidnap Governor Whitmer at her vacation home. They thought they would avoid local law enforcement by blowing up the bridge near her home and potentially escaping by boat. They called Governor Whitmer a tyrant. They wanted to hogtie her and take pictures like it was a drug bust. Again, the FBI detailed that whole plot in public in October of 2020. Here was President Trump talking about it earlier this month.
As another example, the sting that they did involving Gretchen Whitmer was fake, just like those who instigated January 6th. It was a fake deal, fake. It was a fake deal. Gretchen Whitmer was in less danger than the people sitting in this room right now.
Today, two of the men central to that very real plot to kidnap Michigan Governor Whitmer were convicted for their crimes. They face up to life in prison for them. Actions do, in fact, have consequences. But if this whole thing, the storming of the state capitol, the extremist plans for violence, President Trump claiming it was all fake, if that all feels familiar to you, you aren't crazy. The storming of the Michigan state capitol and the plot against the governor there were in many ways the ideological precursors to January 6th. The first real manifestation of the idea that if a civil servant doesn't do what you want, you should go physically threaten or harm them. We saw that on January 6th with the chance of hang Mike Pence. We saw that again earlier this month when an armed man tried to attack the Cincinnati FBI field office after the FBI raided President Trump's Florida home. Everyone from the judge who signed the search warrant in that case to the FBI agents involved, all of them are facing threats of violence from the right. Even county-level election officials across the country are facing consistent physical threats these days for the crime of trying to fairly administer our elections. And then tonight, we just got the news that the IRS is launching a full security review of all of its facilities nationwide because of just how many threats that the IRS is getting. It is all concerning, and it is worth remembering that Donald Trump is continuing to fan all of the flames. But it is also worth remembering that America is still a country of laws. We have one last primary result to get to tonight. Some breaking news here in New York's 17th congressional district. NBC News now projects that Sean Patrick Maloney, who's chair of the DCCC, has defeated State Senator Alessandra Biaggi. MSNBC will have election coverage throughout this very exciting night. Now it is time for the last word with my friend Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Alex. And I've had my eye on exactly one House race, and that is the House race of my last guest last night, 25-year-old Maxwell Alejandro Frost. He has won his primary. It's a heavily Democratic district, so this is one of those, it's like those New York City primaries. The winner of the Democratic primary is very, very likely the next member of Congress from that district. So we have a new youngest member of the House of Representatives in January. He was on this program last night. We're going to try to find him somewhere in the celebration at the end of the hour, see if we can get a couple of minutes with him on the phone or something at the end of this hour tonight.
It's a good news story. I love it. Gen Z in the House. It's time. This is what changes democracy, Lawrence. It's great.
It is.
Find
it really is.
Find that Maxwell Frost.
It really is. And that age group needed that win. It's really great.
Have a great show.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you. Well, Donald Trump's continuing, unsolvable, lifetime problem is that stupid attracts stupid. That is why Donald Trump has always been surrounded by stupidity. And now that Donald Trump has painted himself into the corner of the first ex-president under multiple criminal investigations. Donald Trump is surrounded now by nothing but stupid. And that is why the Trump sycophants decided it was a good idea to make public a letter from the National Archives to one of Donald Trump's lawyers, written 3 months before the FBI obtained a search warrant for government documents at Donald Trump's Florida home. Releasing that letter was a profoundly stupid thing to do. The person who made the letter public is John Solomon, who was dumped by the Fox propaganda channel because he was a bit too reckless even for them. Since John Solomon no longer has guest privileges on Sean Hannity's show, he decided to reveal that letter in a podcast conversation with Steve Bannon, who is so not smart, he is awaiting sentencing for criminal contempt of Congress. Here is Donald Trump in the last year of his presidency introducing the person who wrote that letter and who, in effect, called in the FBI to go after the Trump documents.
Deborah Steidel-Wall, Deputy Archivist of the United States. That sounds like a very big job. That's a lot of archives, isn't it? How many buildings does that take up, right? Great job. I hear you do a great job. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it is a very big job, and she does do a great job, as her letter shows. And the archives takes up more than one building, but Donald Trump's hotel in Florida is not one of them. Deborah Steidel-Wall could never have imagined that she was going to become the most important archivist in American history. If you've never known the name of the archivist of the United States before now, welcome to the club. It is not the place where attention seekers go to work. It probably was not what Deborah Steidel-Wall was dreaming of doing when she was a college student at Georgetown and then a graduate student at American University studying film. If she ever had fantasies of fame, it may have been of the Hollywood variety. But in 1991, during the Republican administration of the first President Bush, Deborah Steidel-Wall went to work at the National Archives as an archivist trainee with a specialty in film. 20 years later, Deborah Steidel-Wall became Deputy Archivist of the United States in 2011. And after Archivist David Ferrero retired in May of just this year, Deborah Steidel-Wall became acting archivist of the United States. And there, instantly, she found herself in the middle of the most serious problem any archivist has ever had with a former president. In her very first days as acting archivist, Deborah Steidel-Wall sent a 4-page letter to one of Donald Trump's lawyers that the Trump team decided to make public last night, and that reveals that in May, Donald Trump was knowingly violating the law by possessing government records and asking the archives not to tell the FBI all about it. The letter describes the ongoing struggle to get the documents from Donald Trump. Quote, "The National Archives had ongoing communications with the former president's representatives throughout 2021 about what appeared to be missing presidential records, which resulted in the transfer of 15 boxes of records to the National Archives in January 2022. In its initial review of materials within those boxes, the National Archives identified items marked as classified national security information up to the level of top secret and including sensitive, compartmented information and special access program materials." The letter points out to Donald Trump's lawyer, quote, "There are important national security interests in the FBI and others in the intelligence community getting access to these materials. According to the National Archives, among the materials in the boxes are over 100 documents with classification markings comprising more than 700 pages. Some include the highest levels of classification, including special access program materials." The important thing to remember is that this is just a description of the first batch of documents that Donald Trump handed over. That first batch included 700 pages of highly classified material, and that wasn't all of what Donald Trump was still keeping at his home in Florida. After he handed over those 700 pages, he still had more. The archivist's letter to Donald Trump's lawyer explains that this is the subject of an ongoing criminal investigation. This is in May. The letter says, access to the materials is not only necessary for purposes of our ongoing criminal investigation, but the executive branch must also conduct an assessment of the potential damage resulting from the apparent manner in which these materials were stored and transported. Donald Trump's lawyers had asked the archives to not hand over all of those documents that they found at his home to the FBI for their investigation, so that Donald Trump's lawyers could, quote, ascertain whether any specific document is subject to privilege, and then to consult with the former president so that he may personally make any decision to assert a claim of constitutionally based privilege. The archivist's letter informed Donald Trump's stunningly stupid lawyers that there is no such privilege for a former president. The letter said the question in this case is not a close one. There is no basis for the former president to make a protective assertion of executive privilege. Deborah Steidel-Wall ends her letter to Donald Trump's lawyer saying, I have therefore decided not to honor the former president's protective claim of privilege for the same reasons I have concluded that there is no reason to grant your request for a further delay before the FBI and others in the intelligence community begin their reviews. Accordingly, the National Archives will provide the FBI access to the records in question. And so, Deborah Steidel-Wall, who is now the most famous archivist of the United States in the history of that very obscure office, has shown beyond a shadow of a doubt that she, who has a graduate degree in film and did not go to law school, understands all of the relevant law far better than any of Donald Trump's lawyers, who are as lost in the Trumpian fog of stupidity as their client always has been. And that is a problem that Donald Trump cannot solve. Leading off our discussion tonight is Mark Zaid, attorney who who specializes in national security and security clearances. Also with us, Glenn Kirshner, former federal prosecutor and an MSNBC legal analyst, and Harry Litman, former U.S. attorney and former deputy assistant attorney general under President Clinton. He's now legal affairs columnist for the Los Angeles Times. And Mark, let me begin with you from the defense attorney's perspective. Let's assume somehow Donald Trump found his way to a competent criminal defense attorney in this situation. First of all, would you have made that letter public? And then secondly, what does that letter tell you about the challenges facing Donald Trump's defense?
I didn't understand from the moment I read the letter why this was being released by the Trump team. You know, as you and others have been describing, not by the legal team, but by his supporters like John Solomon. There's nothing in this letter that, as you've just laid out, that puts the president in any positive light whatsoever. I don't particularly get it. I agree with the legal analysis that's in this letter. I will tell you, I have worked with the National Archives many times over the years. I have helped them recover stolen property. I have sued the National Archives many times. In fact, I think I'm in a couple of current lawsuits against them now. Their top leadership that has been there for many years are experts on classification. In fact, a former classification czar is in the leadership. Their general counsel, mentioned in the letter, has been there for decades. These are people who know what they are doing. They are neutral. They are nonpartisan. This is a damning letter against President Trump and his legal team.
Glenn Kirshner, so we've heard from the defense. That's as good a defense lawyer as you can get. And he's not seeing exactly where you go with this on the Trump defense side.
Yeah, there really is nowhere to go. There is no safe haven for Donald Trump. No matter what his attorneys try to throw into the mix, Lawrence, it only makes matters worse. And, you know, as bad as that letter from the National Archives is for him, because it, you know, discloses that there are some of our most important national secrets that apparently were residing at Mar-a-Lago, being rummaged through by who knows who. But, you know, I read something recently that I think is even worse for Donald Trump. And that was, and you spent a lot of time on it last night, when the New York Times reported that Mr. Trump went through the boxes himself in late 2021. Now, first of all, that means he was concealing these documents on the property at Mar-a-Lago for a very long time, from late 2021 until the search warrant was executed by the FBI in August of 2022. But even more importantly, that has both legal consequences and, even more importantly, practical consequences. The legal consequences is when you have a crime that involves possession, like mishandling of classified documents or national defense information, prosecutors have to prove that the defendant handled them and mishandled them. And, you know, the law has two kinds of possession: actual possession, when you're grabbing hold of something, and constructive possession, like when Donald Trump said, hey, put those boxes in a storage shed. He may never have touched the boxes, but he directed that they be placed in a location over which he had control and access. That's the very definition of constructive possession. But, you know, we prosecutors are a conservative bunch, not necessarily politically, but we don't like to take risks. We like to bring really strong cases. And Lawrence, once I saw the reporting that Donald Trump went through the boxes himself, that will give prosecutors a real comfort level about bringing charges that involve Donald Trump personally mishandling classified or national defense information.
And Harry Litman, the Times, when it reported that line, Mr. Trump went through the boxes himself. That's the sources that it's, I'm going to read the line again as they report it. Mr. Trump went through the boxes himself in late 2021, according to multiple people briefed on his efforts before turning them over. Harry, that indicates there are multiple potential witnesses to this this piece of evidence that Donald Trump actually went through the boxes himself. Assuming he did, and let's make one more assumption. Let's assume Donald Trump didn't have any idea that there was any information at all at his home until December of 2021. That's a big leap in Donald Trump's favor just for the moment. Let's pretend he didn't know. And he discovers them in December of 2021. And as the Times says, he went through the boxes himself. What is his obligation upon going through those boxes and seeing that they are government documents, presidential documents that belong to the government? That's set one. And set two, within that, there are plenty of documents, hundreds it turns out, labeled classified. What is Donald Trump's legal obligation when he looks at those boxes?
Well, I'll tell you one thing it isn't. That's to conceal them and lie about them. This letter is so damning for the reasons you said, but two other things to really point out. The first is, you know, he's brazen, but he has a really small playbook. He's a one-trick pony. He's doing the exact same argument now about executive privilege. So his ally has just published an entire legal analysis, and it's not just from the archivist, by the way. She checks with the DOJ, the Office of Legal Counsel, so it completely trashes his legal claim. That's for starters. And now, second, in this ongoing what are things going to look like Thursday, he has led with his chin in a way that now the department can come in and say, oh, well, besides this letter, let me tell you what really happened, and there will now be the public accounting of the most important aspect that would ever come out in the redacted version, which is all the back and forth. Remember, this letter is from May, 4 more weeks, and then more and more and more. So he's given the DOJ an opportunity to just slap him around and make the magistrate come Thursday say, you know, this has been sort of revealed. We can do it in a more elliptical way. So that's a long-winded way of answering your question, but the main point is obligation, you know, whether or not he needs to return it right away, and any of us would, Glenn would affirm, you see documents like that, your head spins if they're outside of a skiff. You may not continue to conceal them and lie about them, and if you do, you're looking at 20-year statute that they did potentially or that they found in the search warrant here, which is obstruction. So once you have his knowledge, the obstruction follows much more clearly.
And Mark, another point on obstruction. This letter from the archives specifies to Donald Trump's lawyers that these documents need to be handed over to the FBI for a criminal investigation. This letter's dated May 10th. Here's Donald Trump's lawyer holding this in his hands on May 10th. If he doesn't know it before, he knows it now. The FBI is doing a criminal investigation of Donald Trump's handling of these documents. That's May 10th. June 2nd, FBI agents and Justice Department lawyers come down to Donald Trump's house in Florida. And the lawyer who got that letter, hands over more documents, but keeps some that are not handed over at that time. What does that do to this case?
Well, I think it shows, for one, that is more than just Donald Trump who's potentially facing legal liability. It may be some of the lawyers. It's going to be depending on what they knew when they filed this attestation that there was no longer any classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, clearly, which wasn't true, since we know by the FBI seizure. So it brings in a lot of play. But the other thing that this letter shows, people have been wondering, this motion that Donald Trump and his legal team filed yesterday, which is horrible, quite frankly. I would fire anyone who wrote it if they were working for my firm. But that letter, people were saying, why did it take 2 weeks to file the motion? You know, if you're asking for a special master to look at this information, and we can talk about that if you want, because it's a separate issue also, but if you waited that long, why? But this letter even shows more, because here it is, they're put on notice back in May that actually the former president has the right to have representatives review the documents that are in its possession to do its own classification review if they wanted, so long as they had the proper security clearance. I believe that is even John Solomon that is being referred to in this letter. Have we heard, and Kash Patel, the other one who's been speaking about this, you know, I wave my magic hand, the documents are declassified. Have we heard them say anything about getting access? No. And I would like to know why that is. Have they made an effort to get access? They were even offered access to the unclassified information so that they could do an inventory. We haven't heard anything about that either. And I think we can agree that if there's silence from the Trump camp, it's because they actually think it doesn't help them. That means I really want to know what it was and what the answers are.
Mark Zaid, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for having Gregory Peck as Atticus Finch over your shoulder. I wish we could have him in this discussion. Glenn Kirshner, thank you. Harry Littman, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Appreciate it. And we're going to go right to Steve Kornacki, who's covering tonight's primaries. Steve, what's the latest?
Well, we've got suspense here, and I think some unexpected suspense potentially in New York's 19th district. This is the special election here for a seat in Congress. Democrat Pat Ryan right now, you see, with an advantage over the Republican Mark Molinaro. Now, keep in mind the way the vote counting is taking place here in New York 19 is most of these counties are counting up the vote by mail and the early vote first. That tends to be by far the much more Democratic-friendly type of vote. And then what happens is they add in the same-day vote, the vote that was cast today in person. That tends to be a much more Republican-friendly vote. So we've been watching. Ryan's had the lead all night. You see it just happened again. Molinaro has been creeping up as more votes have been coming in. But this seems to be, they both seem to be on a collision course with a very, very close race. Give you an example here of one county that's basically, it says 80% in, but we actually believe, based on what the county is showing us, that this may be all of the vote. This is just to give you an example of what we're seeing here. Compare, Molinaro wins this county 66 to 34%. This is Schoharie County. Compare that to the 2020 election result in this county. It's almost identical. Trump won this county 63 to 34%. Now, this district as a whole went for Joe Biden by 2 points in 2020. So for Ryan basically to be matching the Biden number, if he can do that across the district, remember, Biden won it by 2. If Ryan's matching it in a Republican county, that's about where he wants to be. And I think that gives you an indication of how close this is shaping up to be. So the two key counties I think this is really going to start to come down to, number one is right down here. This is Ulster County. This is the largest county in the district. A quarter of all the votes in the district are going to come out of Ulster County. This is Ryan's base. He's the county executive in Ulster County. And you could see, just compare, again, most Democratic county in the district. Biden got 60% of it in 2020. Ryan currently is getting about 67% of the vote. Largely what is still being counted up in Ulster County is the same-day vote. So this Ryan number is going to continue to come down, we expect. The question is, though, can it land when all the votes are counted? Can Ryan be at or above 60% in Ulster County? That looms as a crucial benchmark for him. If he can get to 61, 62, 63, something like that, it would. Anyway, yeah, back to you, Lawrence.
Steve, thank you very much. We're going to be coming back to you. That one's going to be one we're watching late into the night, it looks like. Thank you very much, Steve.
Okay.
And when we come back, Congressman Eric Swalwell will join us. Tonight, the New York Times is reporting that the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol has conducted interviews with members of Donald Trump's cabinet. The Times reports, quote, the panel has been holding closed-door interviews with senior Trump administration officials in an effort to uncover more about the period between January 6th, 2021, when a mob of Mr. Trump's supporters attacked Congress, and January 20th, when President Biden was sworn in, including talks about invoking the 25th Amendment. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell of California. He served as a House impeachment manager in the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump in the United States Senate. He's a member of the House Judiciary Committee and the Intelligence Committee. And Congressman Swalwell, those concerns about possibly invoking the 25th Amendment occurred reportedly after what those members of the cabinet saw Donald Trump do and not do on January 6th, though it is very likely, it seems to me, that the Justice Department is looking at many of those same members of the cabinet to put under oath in a grand jury to ask them what they know and what they saw about Donald Trump's handling of classified material.
We had every reason to be worried, Lawrence, that we would not see a peaceful transition of power on January 20. And those 14 days were terrifying. And that's why Speaker Pelosi actually first tried to make a deal before the impeachment vote to just have Pence lead an invocation of the 25th Amendment, because a secure transition was anything but guaranteed. But it does raise the question, what was Donald Trump doing as it was likely that he was going to face, a criminal investigation into January 6th, other investigations that were looming when he was going to leave office? What was his motivation or intent, considering the access to classified materials, the vast materials that he would be able to take with him if he wanted to?
And when you read this new information about Trump was on very much on notice by May, if not sooner. There could have been earlier communications referring to a criminal investigation. But by May 10th, we see from the National Archives a letter saying this is a criminal investigation of what you're doing with those documents. And Donald Trump continues to do it.
Lawrence, the National Archives showed remarkable patience for an individual who was not worthy of patience and someone who has priors. And when I say priors, this former president, while he was president, tried to leverage millions of U.S. taxpayer dollars to have a U.S. ally in Ukraine get dirt on his political opponent. So you would have to assume that he's also capable of leveraging the deepest U.S. secrets that affect troop protection, national security, our technical collection capabilities, that he would leverage that as well for his own personal gain. So, of course, they were going to show deference because he was a former president, but they pushed him to a point where they had to seize those records, knowing that there was nothing good that Donald Trump, hardly a consumer of intelligence products, was going to do with that information.
As a member of the Intelligence Committee, you obviously know with real clarity the meaning and importance of these various classification state elements that have been described in that letter from the archives. What do those classification levels mean? What do they mean to you? What can you tell us about them that we should know that those were the classification levels that Donald Trump was in possession of at his Florida home?
Yeah, code word classifications mean that even if you have a top secret clearance, there's a limited universe within top secret cleared individuals who need to know. And when I heard, from reporting of the Washington Post and the New York Times that one of the documents relates to one of our most closely held secrets, boy, Lawrence, there's only a handful of times where I've been told by intelligence officials briefing us that this is something that fewer than 100 or 1,000 people in the U.S. government know. And if it was something like that, you can see why the FBI, lost their patience and wanted to seize those documents. And again, this is somebody who has shown in the past that he would leverage U.S. resources for his own benefit, so he deserved no benefit of the doubt that he wouldn't try and do this again.
Congressman Eric Swalwell, thank you very much for joining us again tonight. We always appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And coming up, we'll have more with Steve Kornacki, and John Heilemann will join us on this primary election night in New York and Florida. That's coming up. It is primary election night in New York and Florida. Let's go right to Steve Kornacki at the big board. Steve, what's the latest?
Yeah, again, Lawrence, we've just been following this drama in this special election for Congress in the 19th District of New York. The Democrat Pat Ryan, again, we have been expecting his number is going to continue to come down. The Republican Mark Molinaro, his number is going to continue to go up. They're going to meet somewhere right around 50%. This thing is looking like it's right on the line. The key here, again, the backdrop is it is a district that Joe Biden carried by 2 points in 2020. If you went back to 2016, it was a district that Donald Trump carried by 7. So it was a Trump-Biden district that kind of swung in the way the country swung. And the expectation, a month out in this race was that the Republicans, the national political climate a month or two ago looked very favorable to Republicans. Typically in the midterm cycle, it will look very favorable for the out-of-power party. And what that meant was the expectation was Molinaro in a district that Biden won by 2. In a typical midterm where the out-of-power party does really well, that usually translates into a win in an election like this for the Republican. So watching these results come in tonight, what has been so striking in a lot of these counties is how similar the result ends up looking to the 2020 result. Here's Schoharie County. It says 80% in. We actually believe this is probably all the vote in Schoharie County. And you can see very closely mirroring here the 2020 election result. This is a Republican county, but I'm just showing you this to show that it's not like Molinaro is surging here. Ryan is running at the Biden level, even in this Republican county. There are some other smaller counties where we have all or most of the vote in, where Molinaro has made some gains on what Trump did. But what this is really coming down to, I think I'll reset it so you see the full numbers here. What this is really coming down to, I think potentially, are 2 counties, 2 next-door neighbor counties, and these are the 2 biggest in the district. This is Ulster County, you see in blue. This is the biggest county in the district. It is the political base of Pat Ryan. He's the county executive in Ulster County. It's also the most Democratic county in the district. And right next door in red, you see Dutchess County. Dutchess County is the second biggest part of this district. Molinaro is the county executive in Dutchess County. So the 2 dynamics that we're watching as these final numbers start to come in will start here in Dutchess County, Molinaro's base. You see Molinaro now has opened up a lead here of about 2.5 points over Ryan. There are more votes to come. It's same-day votes that are being reported out here. Molinaro has been winning the same-day vote in Dutchess County, and this is where Molinaro has made his biggest gain in the district, just in terms of raw votes. Biden carried the Dutchess County portion of this district in 2020. Molinaro is on his way to carrying it tonight. So this is going to be, and it just given the size of this county, County. It's about 1/6 of the district in terms of the votes it produces. So that swing, Trump getting 47%, Molinaro's at 51%, that could climb to 52 or 53. That's his biggest single gain tonight, probably anywhere in this district, over what Donald Trump did. And if Molinaro is able to win tonight, this will probably be why. That leaves the big remaining question in Ulster County, where there are also votes still coming in. Now, take a look at Ulster County in 2020. Joe Biden got 60% of the vote. Now, Pat Ryan is at 64.5% of the vote. So the other question here is, how much farther down does this vote come for Pat Ryan? If he can land this at 64, 63%, maybe 62%, something in there, that might be enough to offset the gains that Molinaro is making in his home county of Dutchess County. So it's how much better is Molinaro going to do in the remaining vote in Dutchess County? And how much is Ryan able to hold on to what he has right now in terms of his lead in Ulster County? There are some other places here. If this gets really, really close, we could be talking about Columbia County, Rensselaer County, some other places with outstanding vote. But it really looks in some ways here like there's a battle between the two candidates' bases here in the two biggest counties in this district. And again, I'll just reset here to see if more vote has come in. Again, you can see here, Ryan leading by 7 points right now. Still plenty of vote to come. This is, by the way, this is extremely high turnout. This shows there's extremely high interest. Both parties are showing in this race here. And again, we have been looking at this race as a bellwether. This is our last true special election bellwether heading into the November election. The question that's been posed this summer, the question that has been posed in the wake of the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade, is whether the national political atmosphere has shifted in a way that is more favorable to Democrats than it looked earlier in the year. Since the Supreme Court decision on Roe versus Wade at the end of June, before tonight, there had been two special elections. One was in Minnesota, one was in Nebraska. In both of those special elections, the Republican candidate won, but in each of those special elections, the Democratic candidate did significantly better than Joe Biden had done in 2020. So Democrats were encouraged by those results because they had outperformed Biden, and it suggested to them that potentially their own voters had become motivated in the wake of the Supreme Court decision. This becomes, and here we go, we just got a few more votes in. You can see that margin staying right there at 7 points for Ryan. This becomes the clearest test we've had yet. A district that was Trump, that was Biden, that was only a 2-point margin in 2020. If Ryan were ever able to finish tonight with an outright victory in this district, that argument that Democrats are making that the national political climate has shifted their way post-Roe decision would be strongly buttressed if he's able to win this. That's a huge, huge if right now for all those reasons I just showed you. But you can see we did just get a few more votes, and I'm checking to see. Yeah, that's where they came in from. They came in from Ulster County. Ryan's number 63.5 right now in Ulster. Remember, the Biden benchmark is 60. Ryan wants to be north of that by the end of the night. Nothing more from Dutchess since we started. So, again, we're going to continue to look. Ulster, Dutchess, a few other places. But this one is shaping up to be quite a nail-biter here. Stakes very high. Last big bellwether before November. And big question here we weren't expecting to be asking at the beginning of the summer, Lawrence, about the national political climate and whether Democrats might actually be improving their position there.
Well, we're going to be watching that district to find out. Steve Kornacki, thank you very much. We'll be coming back to you as it develops there. Joining us now is John Howman, co-host and executive producer of Showtime's The Circus and host of the Hell and High Water podcast from the Recount. He's an MSNBC national affairs analyst. And, John, I had labeled this primary election night in New York and Florida, which it is, except for that race where there is actually a vacant seat in that district in the House. And so this is Democrat versus Republican, and Steve Kornacki's right. That's the one we're going to have to watch right down to the finish tonight.
Yeah, I mean, and look, it has been, as Steve said, it's been one that in the wake of all that's happened, and I would say, you know, it's in the wake of the January 6th hearings in June and July, in the wake of what's happened just in this last week at Mar-a-Lago with Donald Trump, obviously after the repeal or the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the shooting in Uvalde, all of these things that the Democrats have been counting on to to shift the ground and to create momentum. It is obviously a bellwether. And I think there's another question that if Steve, after I get off here, Steve can answer this, I'd be really interested to know, because the one question is the ground tilting towards Democrats. Another question is why? And you can cite these various triggers, these things that have happened in the national discourse. But one of the questions, Lawrence, is like, is it that Democrats are doing better on the whole? Is it that swing voters and voters in the center ideologically are now somehow more attracted to Democrats? Or is it what a lot of progressives think? And I think there might be something, if you look hard at these Ulster County results, and in kind of the dynamic of that entire race, is that what we're seeing is that this is going to be a bellwether that also says that what's happening is enthusiasm, fear, anger, enthusiasm, however you want to add it all up, that in the bluest of counties, in the places where the core Democratic base, which turned out in large numbers back in 2018, you might be seeing that also, that's kind of, that's the nature of the change is about Democratic partisans feeling motivated and energized and determined to turn out in the context of everything that's happening in the country.
And the drivers in those upstate counties today filling up their gas tanks on the way to go vote were paying a lot less money to fill up those gas tanks this month today than they were at the beginning of the summer.
Yes, and look, I mean, for those Democratic partisans who would get angry at pundits who would say, the White House is worried about gas prices. Gas prices, that doesn't matter if the president's not in control of it completely. It doesn't matter if it's a worldwide phenomenon. We know historically that inflation is bad, but particular kinds of inflation are worse. And you can fight with people who pointed that out back in the past. But I'll tell you, one person who would never fight with you about it was Ron Klain, who watched that gas price every day. And now the Democrats may be benefiting from seeing the downward trend. And there's no doubt that there's a lot of people in the White House and a lot of Democrats across the country who are thrilled that the kind of what people think of as the bellwether marks of inflation. It's like gas prices and the price of bacon. You got to make sure those things are going down. Food and transport. And if those things are stable or going down, that also augurs better for Democrats and them having a better chance to fight some of these historical trends that would say it was going to be a big Republican year.
John Heilemann, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks much.
And coming up, 25-year-old Maxwell Alejandro Frost joined us just last night on the eve of the Florida primary. He is a winner tonight, and he will join us next. Here's the election I've been watching tonight. 25-year-old Maxwell Alejandro Frost, the former organizing director at March for Our Lives, who joined us on this program just last night, has won the Democratic primary for the House seat in Florida vacated by Congresswoman Val Demings, who won her primary tonight to challenge Republican Senator Marco Rubio in the general election. That Florida district is a heavily Democratic district, and so Mr. Frost, it's very likely going to be the next member of Congress from that district. And joining us now is Maxwell Alejandro Frost. I am going to address you the way you will soon be addressed on the floor of the House of Representatives and in committee, and that is Mr. Frost of Florida. Thank you very much. This is your third time. You were here when your campaign began. You were here last night on the very last minute of your campaign. How did you do it? 25-year-old convinces that congressional district that you're the person to do this job. How did you do it?
Well, look, it just wasn't me. It was the movement that we built, our volunteers, the people who are knocking doors every day, making phone calls. And at the end of the day, it's our message. It's a hopeful message, one that says that no matter who you are, you deserve health care, you deserve a good job, you deserve a union, you deserve the right to an abortion. And these are the things that we were talking about with folks in this district. But the other thing is also looking at the context of this campaign. We won this in the midst of a dark year in Florida because of Governor Ron DeSantis. So it was hope despite that. And I truly believe that's why we won this race and why we're going to win the general in November.
Did the right-wing approaches of the governor actually help energize your campaign?
I think what it did is set the stage for this righteous anger that our folks have here in Florida. And what we did is we wanted to transform that righteous anger into a love of the people who have been oppressed by this governor. This governor has said any issue that you can think of is the problem and is the fault of gay folks, of our LGBTQ plus community, of Black folks, of immigrants. He has scapegoated every vulnerable community for every single issue that he has failed to solve himself. And so that is part of the reason why we won this campaign. It's about the positive message despite what he's done. But we're moving forward. We're looking towards November. We're going to elect, Congressman Charlie Crist to be the next governor of Florida, and we're going to remove Ron from the governor's mansion.
Maxwell Alejandro Frost, it has been a remarkable journey from your first time on this program to tonight. Thank you very much for finding the time to join us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and folks can follow us at frostforcongress.com.
Thank you very much. We will be right back. Mr. Frost of Florida gets tonight's last word. The 11th hour with Stephanie Ruhle starts now.
Good evening. I'm Alicia Menendez. This is MSNBC's special coverage of primary night in America. Polls are closed in Florida, Oklahoma, and here in New York. And we are watching a number of key races tonight. We start with a huge result for the Democratic Party in the bellwether special election in New York's 19th congressional district. NBC News can report that Democrat Pat Ryan has defeated Republican Mark Molinaro for the congressional seat vacated by current New York Democratic Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado. Both parties were watching this race closely for potential insights into November's midterm elections, especially the impact the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade will have on turnout.
As you were casting your ballot today, what was sort of the issue that was top of mind for you?
I think just in general, for me, being a woman personally, abortion rights are incredibly important.
The first thing that pops into my mind is that Roe versus Wade thing. That freaked me out. And I just thought that, every election, every time there's a chance to vote and to say something, you got to go out and say it.
We're going to discuss all that ahead, but in New York, there are 4 other congressional races we are watching closely. In New York's 12th congressional district, longtime Democratic representatives Jerry Nadler and Carolyn Maloney were forced into the same race due to redistricting. Nadler has won that primary, ending Maloney's 30-year stint in Congress. In New York's 17th district, Democratic Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney and Mondaire Jones were almost forced to run against each other the same way Nadler and Carolyn Maloney were. But Congressman Jones is now running in New York's newly drawn 10th district. He is facing a crowded field, including Dan Goldman, former lead counsel during Donald Trump's first impeachment, who has spent millions of his own money in that race. Goldman is currently leading the pack, but the race still too close to call. Tonight, Congressman Maloney, the current chair of the DCCC, fought off a primary challenge from Progressive State Senator Alessandra Biaggi. But perhaps the biggest race is unfolding upstate in New York's deep red 23rd congressional district, which spans the state's southern border with Pennsylvania. Republican Congressman Chris Jacobs was effectively pushed out by his own party after he expressed support for an assault weapons ban following the mass shootings in Uvalde, Texas, and nearby Buffalo, New York. Republican Carl Palladino, a far-right candidate, ran to replace Jacobs, who is not seeking re-election. Palladino previously ran for governor of New York and lost by 30 points back in 2010. Perhaps best known, and I am not making this up, for a scandal in which he was caught sending a video depicting bestiality to colleagues, and who recently praised Adolf Hitler in a radio interview, has tonight lost again. NBC News now projecting as of moments ago that Palladino will narrowly lose his primary tonight by just about 4 points. Meanwhile, in Florida, former Republican governor and current Democratic Congressman Charlie Crist has defeated State Agricultural Commissioner Nikki Fried to be the Democratic nominee to run against incumbent Republican Governor Ron DeSantis. Despite winning the governor's mansion by only a 30,000 vote margin back in 2018, DeSantis has governed as though he has a mandate. pushing through a number of controversial far-right laws. He is a top target for Democrats to unseat this November. One voter told NBC News correspondent Shaq Brewster that he supported Chris, something of a perennial statewide candidate, because he's a familiar face.
I was remembering Charlie Crist. Okay, he was okay. I know him, so I said, you know what, that's where I'm going again.
So you went with Chris because he was familiar to you?
Yes. Right. Yeah. And I thought he did okay when he was governor, and I'm hoping he'll be better now.
Meanwhile, in the Senate race in Florida, Democratic Congressman Val Demings, the former Orlando chief of police who served as a House impeachment manager during Donald Trump's first impeachment trial, has clinched the nomination to run against incumbent Republican Senator Marco Rubio, who's seeking his third term in the U.S. Senate. And in Florida's 11th congressional district, far-right candidate Laura Loomer, an anti-Muslim extremist who calls herself a proud Islamophobe, who once handcuffed herself to the doors of Twitter's headquarters in New York to protest her account getting banned, lost a closer-than-expected primary against incumbent Republican Daniel Webster. We have got a lot to get to tonight, so let's get right to it with Steve Kornacki back at the big board. Steve?
Yeah, well, this is the story of the night, and I think really this could be the story of the summer politically, just in terms of setting the stage for the midterm election and for expectations. I'm talking about the special election in New York's 19th district. As you mentioned, Pat Ryan, the Democrat, has defeated Mark Molinaro, the Republican. Ryan will go to Congress to fill the remainder of Antonio Delgado's term. Ryan will also be running in a different district, actually, this November. But what makes this such a significant result? Well, several things. First of all, this really is the last major special election test before November's election. And it comes after a two-month period when we have been questioning, folks have been questioning whether the political environment in this country might be changing away from the Republicans' favor and in the Democrats' direction. There have been a number of things that have been happening in the last few months. One, the generic ballot. When you ask folks in polling, which party would you like to see control Congress, Democrats or Republicans? Earlier this year, Republicans had been winning on that question. Now, it's essentially a tie when you average the polls together. So the generic ballot has moved in the Democrats' favor. There was the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe versus Wade. The question of whether that would motivate, get Democratic voters, Democratic-aligned voters off the sidelines, motivated to vote, as Republicans already seem to be motivated to vote in this midterm election. There is some polling evidence, some indications in polling that that might be the case. Then, earlier this summer, we had two other special elections. One was in Minnesota, one was in Nebraska. Both were in Republican districts. Both were in districts that went for Donald Trump. Both were won by Republicans, but the Democrats did better in each of those special elections than Joe Biden had done in those districts in 2020. So Democrats looked at that and said, hey, maybe that is a sign that there is some increased enthusiasm for Democrats in the wake of the overturning of Roe. But then that set up this election tonight as a real test, kind of a pure test in what is truly a bellwether district. What I'm showing you here is how this 19th district has voted in recent presidential elections. It went for Donald Trump in 2016 when Trump won the presidency. It flipped, and it went for Biden narrowly in 2020 when Joe Biden won the presidency. If you went back to 2012, this district voted for Barack Obama in 2012. It has been right there with the winner of every presidential election, and it's the kind of district in a really strong midterm environment for Republicans, in a midterm environment was really strong for Republicans. This is the exact kind of district they'd have no problem flipping in a special election. If a Republican wave had already been built, a two-point Biden district, that's the kind of thing, that's one of the first things that goes in a political wave. And instead, what's happened tonight in this bellwether district is the Democrats have won it. And actually, Pat Ryan outperforms. Looks like he's going to perform even a little bit better in this district than Joe Biden did. So that is a major indication, I think. That's the clearest indication we've gotten that there really is something happening here in terms of the political climate potentially moving away from a clear Republican advantage, maybe to a more neutral political environment, maybe toward, but certainly in the Democrats' direction. And if you couple that with, I think you mentioned this one too, reading through the results here, this 23rd district special election that was also held tonight, the circumstances here were a little bit different. The winner here, Sempolinski, is not going to be running this fall. The district's kind of being restructured. There wasn't as much that was put into this race in terms of resources and efforts. But even here, the Republicans win. The margin here is about 7 points right now. This was a district that Donald Trump carried by 12 points. So even here, in a race that a lot of money, a lot of attention, a lot of resources didn't go to, you see Democrats performing better than Joe Biden did. Again, this is simply not the pattern. I'm showing the Nebraska, Minnesota, the 23rd district, the 19th district of New York, 4 straight special elections where Democrats have clearly outperformed Joe Biden in his numbers from 2020. So we've been talking all year. Biden's popularity isn't good. The country's mood isn't good, especially when it comes to the economy. Typically, the out-of-power party does really well in midterm elections. I think we now have a strongest single piece of evidence in this 19th district special election tonight, Alicia, that in spite of all of that, I think it's worth asking questions about, can the Democrats hold on to the Senate, and even for the Democrats potentially hold on to the House this November.
Steve Kornacki, always good to see you in your natural environment. Thank you so much for bringing us all of that. For more on all of these fascinating storylines coming out of tonight's elections in New York and Florida, I am joined by a distinguished panel made up of New Yorker and 2 Floridians. Christina Greer is an assistant professor of political science at Fordham University and host of the Grio's The Blackest Questions podcast. Carlos Curbelo represented Florida's 26th congressional district as a Republican in Congress from 2015 to 2019. And David Jolly represented Florida's 13th congressional district as a Republican in Congress from 2015 to 2017. He has since left the Republican Party. It is good to see you all. Christina, let's start with you and this New York 19 race. What does it tell you?
Well, don't forget that seat was open because Kathy Hochul chose Antonio Delgado as her lieutenant governor. And so, as Steve said, this looks good for the Democrats right now. Many would argue that it's too soon to tell, but usually the party in power does lose seats during the midterm election. But, it's possible that the Republicans have been overplaying their hands, when it comes to Roe v. Wade, when it comes to, their lack of motivation to think about any sort of comprehensive gun laws or gun control across all 50 states. These are serious issues that a lot of moderate voters, independent voters, and even weak-leaning Republicans just feel as though the party is off the rails, to say nothing of the Islamophobia, the anti-Semitism, the racism, the anti-immigrant sentiments. For some voters, this is finally going to be an election that might be a stretch too far for some Republicans, and they're either abstaining or they're willing to cross over.
David, we now know that Charlie Crist will be going up against Ron DeSantis. Is not lost on you or Carlos. I'm sure that as of tomorrow, it will be 30 years since Hurricane Andrew landed in Florida. Many onlookers in your state saying it will take nothing short of a political storm to unseat Ron DeSantis. Your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think a lot of people say Florida is a red state. I think that's wrong. Republicans have controlled elections over the past 20 years, but it's still a politically divided state by just 3 or 4 points. And so Charlie Crist enters this race behind, but in the game. Look, Florida Democrats chose a candidate tonight who has not won statewide in 16 years, and that is a critical analysis of his candidacy. But what we are also seeing, that Steve pointed out, is a national trend that may be beginning to favor Democrats. And frankly, for Charlie Crist, for Val Demings, and for down-ballot Democrats in competitive congressional races, that national trend might be enough in the state of Florida to really put them over the edge. But without that national trend in Florida, Democrats are certainly fighting uphill. Look, Republicans, let's flip the script a little bit. Republicans tonight and in previous elections in the last 6 to 8 weeks are woefully off message. They want to be talking about Joe Biden and the economy, and they're actually talking about Donald Trump and Roe v. Wade, or at least they're having to talk about that. That is a losing position for Republicans. The more Democrats like Charlie Crist can focus on those issues, the more likely that he could give Ron DeSantis a competitive race in November.
Carlos, do you agree?
I agree, Alicia. I think that the momentum has shifted here in the last couple months. I mean, Democrats were against the ropes for
months, really since almost the beginning of the Biden presidency. The focus was on inflation, the economy, cost of living, and that has all changed now. And so Democrats here in Florida today did something very different than what they did 4 years ago. They were pragmatic in choosing a candidate in Charlie Crist who can potentially build a winning coalition. Back in 2018, a lot of Democrats favored Gwen Graham. They thought she had broader appeal, that they thought she could beat Ron DeSantis, but primary voters chose Andrew Gillum, someone who came from the more progressive wing of the party. This year, Democrats have done something entirely different. They have gone with a safer choice, someone who can potentially attract independents, attract some disaffected Republicans, having been a Republican himself. And maybe, even though, as you pointed out, it'd be very difficult given Ron DeSantis' structural advantages, big cash advantage, obviously some structural headwinds for Democrats, being that it's a midterm when they control the government. But still, if anyone can build a coalition that can derail Ron DeSantis, it would be Charlie Crist.
I want to bring into our panel NBC News national political reporter Sahil Kapoor. He joins me back at the desk. All right, we were together about 30 minutes ago. We were talking about this New York 19 race, and you said even if it's close, even if the Republican wins here, it still tells you something about what the national environment looks like. Talk to me about that and also sort of core issues that were driving this race.
Yeah, Alicia, it looked like it was headed this way, and now we know Democrat Pat Ryan is going to win this bellwether district up in Hudson Valley. And it's really extraordinary to see not only him win, but also him outpacing President Biden's margin in 2020 suggests that this year is not going to be quite so bad for Democrats if they can keep up this performance. We may be looking at a black swan event occurring in real time. That is the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade, creating that potential miracle that Democrats knew they needed to have any shot at holding the House of Representatives. We're seeing Pat Ryan in this race repeatedly emphasize that issue to try to galvanize Democratic voters, connected it to his military service, talking about in an early ad how fighting for American freedom means fighting for reproductive freedom and bodily autonomy as well. That is one of several issues. It seems to be the biggest one that is motivating Democrats, that has shifted the landscape somewhat. There are other issues as well. Gas prices, which were very high a year ago, have started coming down. Just a few months ago, Democrats seemed to be stuck in legislative quicksand. Suddenly, they're on a hot streak. They passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which has, things they can brag about to older voters, including Medicare negotiating drug prices. They can use it to turn out their younger, Democratic base, progressive voters on the largest investment ever in climate change. So there is reason, I think, for the first time in a long time, for Democrats to have hope. Now, the big question is, can they replicate this performance this fall? I was just talking to you about the caveats. You're going to hear Republicans talk about how this was a New York primary day. This special election coincided with a primary where Democrats in this blue state tend to turn out in bigger numbers than Republicans. That is true. Now, if that makes a big difference between now and this fall in terms of Republican turnout, this may not be reflective. But Democrats still, based on what they just did tonight, have good reason to hope.
Dr. Greer, I got to ask you about Laura Loomer because she is refusing to concede. I want you to take a listen to what she said.
I'm not conceding because I'm a winner, and the reality is our Republican Party is broken to its core. What we have done tonight has really honestly shocked the nation. We have further exposed the corruption within our own feckless, cowardly Republican Party. And that is exactly the reason why, right, I decided to run against a rhino Republican, Daniel Webster. Do nothing, Daniel Webster.
I mean, Doctor, when we talk about these extremist candidates, when we talk about people who have bought into conspiracy theories, to the big lie, it's hard to understate the damage that it does to our democracy to not have people who are part of fair and free elections be willing to concede on the other side of them.
I'm sorry, is that for me?
Yes, Dr. Greer.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, Lisa, this is, free and fair elections are the cornerstone and the foundation of American democracy. And so what Donald Trump is really excavated by refusing to, attend the inauguration, by refusing to acknowledge Joe Biden as the rightful 46th president of the United States, is he's now sowed these seeds in his own party of people who refuse to acknowledge and respect election results. And so we're going to see more of this, not just with Republican refusing to recognize Democratic wins, but Republican primary competitions where they're going to refuse to acknowledge legitimate elections. And so when you undermine elections, which Republicans have been doing for years now, the damage is not just done to American democracy and not just done to parties, but, I teach young people. We need to make sure that young people understand that, their vote should count and it will count. But you can't ever have candidates like what we just heard saying that, the entire party is corrupt and the entire process is corrupt, because that does not bode well for our future, not just in November of 2022, but what is quite concerning to most of us is November 2024 when we have a presidential election and a possible Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis Republican candidate refusing to recognize and respect election results.
David Jolly, I only have about a minute left, but I want to underline an element here, which is the fact that Florida primaries happen very late. We are now very close to the general election. How does that change the contours of these races?
Yeah, look, great question, Alicia. Republicans who control Tallahassee set a late primary years ago to favor incumbents because it would favor Republicans. It is now a sprint, and this is where the amount of money that the governor has, the amount of money that Marco Rubio really come into play because they can run this sprint of TV ads. Look, Val Demings is going to be one of the strongest Senate candidates in the country. Charlie Crist has a little bit of proving to do on the fundraising, but I think if he starts to show numbers close to DeSantis, you'll see the money come in. Two very high-profile races in Florida statewide. Democrats need a little bit of an edge, but they're in this race as of tonight. They might be there in November.
Sahil Kapoor, Christina Greer, Carlos Curbelo, and David Jolly, thank you all so much for staying up with us. Coming up, Donald Trump's legal woes continue to mount, and his own lawyers, they don't seem to be helping. We're going to get you back to Alex Wagner tonight, next.